It wasn't the gold lettering on the envelope that hurt. It was my own daughter forgetting to call me mom. The envelope lay on the counter beside my morning cup of tea, glossy and thick, the kind of paper you feel guilty touching with unwashed hands. Mrs. Margaret Cole, it read in elegant loops, not mom, not even mother, just the formal shell of who I used to be. The kitchen smelled faintly of toast and lemon cleaner, the same way it had for decades. The ticking clock above the window sounded louder than usual, every second reminding me how quiet the house had become since Harold passed. I ran my thumb over the gold foil and tried to guess what kind of occasion deserved such fanfare. When I finally opened it, a small card slipped out, pale cream with embossed lettering. Emily and Charles Hastings invite you to a private celebration at their home, Saturday evening. I stared at the words until they blurred. I didn't need to read the address. I'd been there once, long ago, when Emily first moved in with him. I remember chandeliers that looked like frozen fireworks and rooms too big for conversation. For a long time, I just stood there. The refrigerator hummed, the kettle cooled, and I thought about how long it had been since Emily last visited me here. Last Christmas. No, the Christmas before that. She'd sent flowers this year, expensive white lilies that filled the room with a smell too strong to be comforting. I reached for my glasses and noticed a smudge on the envelope. Tea, probably, or maybe a fingerprint of doubt. Mrs. Margaret Cole. How deliberate it sounded, like she wanted her friends to think her mother was someone else entirely, someone who belonged in their world of fine silver and perfectly folded napkins. Still, my heart did its foolish thing. It fluttered with hope. Maybe this was her way of making peace. Maybe she wanted me there, not just as a guest, but as her mother. I carried the invitation to the living room and set it under the lamp beside Harold's picture. "What do you think, love?" I asked. The silence. The photo didn't answer, of course, but I could almost hear him chuckle, that patient, reassuring sound that used to melt my worry. The truth was, I didn't know if I belonged at that party anymore. Emily had built a world so different from mine, full of people who spoke in half smiles and names I didn't recognize. But she was still my daughter, and if she wanted me there, even under a formal title, maybe that was enough. I folded the invitation carefully and placed it back in its envelope, smoothing the crease like it was something fragile. A bridge, perhaps, that could still be crossed. I told myself I'd think about it tomorrow, but even then, as I rinsed my teacup and turned off the light, I knew I'd already decided I was going to that party, though I had no idea what kind of welcome waited for me there. I ironed the dress I wore the day I received my teaching award. Not that anyone there would remember. The navy fabric had faded just slightly at the seams, but it still held its shape, as if it remembered the pride I once felt wearing it. I laid it flat on the bed and stared at it for a while, wondering if it whispered the same question that had been haunting me all morning. "What are you doing, Margaret?" My closet was full of quiet things, cardigans, scarves, blouses that had known laughter and chalk dust. None of them spoke the language of champagne parties or marble floors. I tried on a soft pink blouse once, but it looked like it was trying too hard to be cheerful. The navy dress, at least, was honest. I brushed my hair in front of the mirror. The silver strands caught the light like threads of frost. I thought of Emily, at my age, her hair sleek, her nails manicured, her life a series of curated photos. When had she started seeing me as someone to manage rather than someone to miss? As I fastened my earrings, I remembered the day she told me she was marrying Charles. I'd smiled for her, though the word Hastings had sounded like a closing door. "You'll love him, Mom," she'd said. I did love that she was happy. I just didn't know it would cost me visits, phone calls, the easy rhythm we once had. I folded the cardigan over my arm, unsure if the house she lived in even had room for warmth. It was strange how the older I grew, the more invisible I became, as if time had thinned me out, layer by layer, until I was seed through. Still, I wanted to show up looking like myself, not the Mrs. Cole on the envelope, but the woman who had raised a daughter through scraped knees and spelling bees, who had stood in front of classrooms full of restless children and made them believe they could do better. That woman still deserved to be seen. I polished my shoes, small circles until the leather reflected a faint version of my face. "There," I whispered, presentable enough. But my hands trembled slightly, betraying the calm I tried to wear. When I looked around the room, the photos, the books, the faint smell of lavender, I realized everything I loved fit within these four walls. The party felt far away already, a world I was stepping into as a stranger. Still, I placed the invitation inside my purse, smoothed my dress one last time, and stood tall. If they'd forgotten who I was, I'd remind them quietly, with grace, and with every step I took toward that door. And as the clock struck 6, I felt the weight of something shift. Not fear, exactly, but the sense that my life was about to be seen through someone else's eyes again. I stood at my daughter's door, listening to laughter fade into whispers, the kind that cut deeper than words. The house loomed like a monument to something I'd never belonged to. Tall windows glowed with soft yellow light, and the air outside smelled faintly of roses and rain. I hesitated before pressing the bell, feeling the weight of every second that passed without an answer. When the door finally opened, it wasn't Emily who greeted me. A man in a black suit, polished, unreadable, looked me over from head to toe. "Yes," he said, as though I might be lost. "I'm invited," I murmured, holding out the envelope like a passport. He took it delicately, his white-gloved fingers brushing against mine, and examined the name. His brow furrowed, just slightly before he nodded. "Ah, Mrs. Cole, one moment, please." He disappeared inside, leaving me on the steps. Behind the closed door, laughter swelled again, a wave of voices. Glasses clinking, a piano somewhere playing a tune that was too cheerful to be kind. I could feel the dampness of the stone beneath my shoes, the chill of being on the threshold of my own daughter's life. When the door finally opened again, he stepped aside. "You may come in," he said. The warmth of the house felt artificial, scented with something floral and expensive. I stood at the edge of a marble floor that gleamed like water, watching heads turn one by one. For a heartbeat, silence, then a return to conversation. Too bright, too careful. Emily appeared near the staircase, her smile thin as a thread. "Mother," she said, her voice clipped, polite. "You made it." Mother, not Mom, not even Margaret this time, just a word spoken through clenched composure. "I wouldn't have missed it," I said softly, but she was already gesturing toward the dining room, introducing me with the same tone she might use for an acquaintance from long ago. A woman in a pearl necklace whispered something to another guest. They both looked my way and smiled, the kind of smile that pretends not to notice. I caught fragments of their words as I passed. Her mother, a public school teacher, I think. Ah yes, quite grounded. Grounded. The words stung like a polite insult. Emily's husband gave me a nod that didn't reach his eyes. I felt smaller in that room of glittering laughter and polished glass than I ever had standing in front of a classroom of children. Someone offered me champagne. I declined. My tea-stained hands felt out of place against the gold rims of their glasses. I stood near the edge of the room, smiling when spoken to, laughing softly when required, waiting for the evening to end before it had even begun. And somewhere beneath all that noise, I wondered when my daughter had learned to look through me instead of at me. When the laughter arose, I realized they weren't laughing with me. They were laughing because of me. Dinner had been a blur of polished silver and practiced conversation. I'd listened more than I spoke, careful not to interrupt the rhythm of their easy confidence. The candles flickered, their light catching the crystal glasses, turning everything golden and unreal. Emily's husband stood, tapping his spoon against his glass. "A toast," he said, his voice carrying through the room like a signal. "To my wife, for her grace, her taste, and for how far she's come." The guests raised their glasses, smiling in anticipation. He turned toward me then, and something in his grin made my stomach tighten. "Emily's done remarkably well," he continued, "considering where she came from." There was a ripple of laughter, polite at first, then louder. Emily's cheeks flushed, but she didn't stop him. Instead, she pressed her lips into a strained smile, the kind that says, "Just go along with it." Someone from across the table added, "I suppose teaching pays in patience, not cash." Another round of laughter followed, sharper this time, echoing in the hollow space of my chest. I smiled, because that's what you do when you're surrounded by people who expect you to take the joke. But my hands trembled in my lap. The fork felt heavy, the room too bright. I thought of the years I'd spent shaping children's minds, including one who now couldn't look me in the eye. For a moment, I looked at Emily. She was laughing, now, nervously, her eyes darting toward me, pleading silently for me not to make a scene. So I didn't. I placed my napkin gently beside my plate, the way I'd done hundreds of times before, at family dinners that once felt like home. "Excuse me," I said softly, and stood. No one stopped me. The laughter continued behind me, muffled now, replaced by the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. I found a hallway lined with portraits, faces of people I didn't know, staring down as if to remind me I didn't belong here. In the reflection of a gilded mirror, I saw myself, the same woman who once stayed up nights grading papers, who taught her daughter to read by candlelight when the power went out. That woman hadn't disappeared, she had just been misplaced. I took a slow breath, straightened my shoulders, and stepped outside toward the cool night air. The laughter faded behind the glass, but its echo followed me like a scar that would take more than silence to heal. Just as I was ready to leave unseen, a voice behind me said, "Mrs. Cole, you changed my life once." I turned, startled. A young man stood near the patio doors, his dark suit slightly rumpled, his hands still hovering over the piano keys. His eyes were kind, the kind that see you before they decide who you are. "I'm sorry," I said, blinking. "Have we met?" He smiled. "You taught me in 5th grade." I was the quiet one in the back with the violin case. And suddenly, I remembered the boy who never spoke but hummed while he drew treble clefs in the margins of his worksheets. "Evan," I whispered. "Evan Brooks." His face lit up. "You remember." For a moment, the air around us softened. The sounds from the house, laughter, glasses clinking, felt far away, like another world entirely. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "You told me once that music wasn't just about talent, it was about listening. No one had ever said that to me before. I wouldn't be here without that." I didn't know what to say. The night breeze lifted my hair. The scent of jasmine drifted from the garden. His words settled in my heart like a small flame. Gentle, steady, healing. "Thank you," I said finally, though it felt too small for what I meant. He hesitated, then added softly, "You shouldn't leave yet. I know you want to, but something tells me your daughter might need you more than she knows." The sincerity in his tone made me pause. I looked back through the window. Emily was standing now, her face pale, her husband whispering something to her that made her shoulders stiffen. "I've already embarrassed her enough for one night," I murmured. Evan shook his head. "No, you've done nothing wrong. Sometimes people forget who lifted them when they were small. They remember, eventually, usually when the ground shifts beneath them." I smiled faintly, a kind of peace settling over me. "You're a wise man, Evan." "Just a grateful one," he said. I stood there a while longer, watching the reflection of the room through the glass, the glittering lights, the empty smiles, the daughter who once held my hand crossing the street. Maybe Evan was right. Maybe leaving quietly wasn't strength this time. Maybe staying was. I turned back, toward the door, my heart steadier now, ready for whatever truth waited on the other side. Because sometimes, the only way to be seen again is to walk back into the room that forgot you. I never expected to hold the microphone again, but when I did, I made sure my daughter finally listened. The evening had begun to wind down, though the music still flowed like honey through the air. I stood near the back of the room, trying to look invisible, when I saw Evan walk to the grand piano at the center. A hush fell as he adjusted the microphone. "Before we end tonight," he said, "I'd like to dedicate one song to the person who made this performance possible." The guests murmured, their curiosity piqued. I assumed he meant Emily or one of the sponsors, but then his eyes found mine. "To my teacher," he said softly, "Mrs. Margaret Cole." The chatter stopped entirely. I froze, unsure if I'd heard him correctly. Emily's head turned sharply, toward me, confusion flickering across her face. Evan continued, his voice calm but resolute. "Years ago, in a small public school classroom, there was a teacher who stayed late every day so a shy boy could practice after hours. She told me that music wasn't about perfection, it was about heart. She gave me courage when I had none. Without her, I wouldn't be standing here tonight." A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. A few faces softened. Others exchanged uneasy glances, the kind that come when a story rearranges the room's balance. He gestured toward me. "Mrs. Cole, would you join me for a moment?" Every instinct in me wanted to decline, to stay where I was, unseen, but the look in his eyes wasn't pity, it was respect. So, I took a breath, steadied my hands, and walked toward the light. Applause began tentatively, then grew. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears as I reached the piano. Evan handed me the microphone. For a second, I thought my voice would fail me, but when I spoke, it was clear and steady, the same tone I used years ago when I stood before a room full of children, teaching them to believe in themselves. "I'm not used to speaking at events like this," I began, "but I suppose a teacher never really stops teaching, even when no one's taking notes anymore." A few polite laughs broke the tension. I smiled gently. I've spent most of my life reminding others that their worth isn't written in the titles they hold, or the names on their invitations. It's written in the kindness they show, especially when no one's watching. I turned slightly, meeting Emily's eyes across the room. She looked pale, almost fragile. I never wanted recognition, I said softly, only to pass something on. Hope, decency, courage. I tried to teach my daughter the same thing. To be proud, yes, but never proud at the expense of compassion. The silence that followed wasn't awkward this time. It was heavy, reverent. I could see guests shifting in their seats, faces lowering, as if realizing how small the earlier laughter had been. Evan began to play, a slow, graceful melody that wrapped around the room like forgiveness itself. I rested a hand on the piano, feeling the vibration traveled through the wood. When the final note faded, I looked up. Thank you, I said simply, for listening. Applause filled the room again, this time warm, genuine, not the kind that smooths over discomfort, but the kind that means something has been seen. And for the first time that evening, I didn't feel like an outsider standing in my daughter's world. I felt like the woman I had always been, whole, steady, unashamed. Somewhere behind the applause, I heard Emily's quiet breath catch, the sound of pride meeting truth, of a daughter realizing she had forgotten the woman who taught her what grace really was. In that moment, I saw my daughter's pride melt into tears, the kind only truth can bring. The guests were still clapping when I stepped back from the piano, but my eyes stayed on Emily. She hadn't moved. Her champagne glass sat untouched, her fingers trembling around the stem. When the music ended, she stood slowly. Mom, her voice cracked on the word she hadn't used in years. Heads turned as she made her way through the crowd, toward me. Up close, she looked younger, not the polished woman in pearls, but the little girl who used to fall asleep on my shoulder after spelling practice. Her mascara had smudged slightly, and for the first time that night, she didn't seem to care. I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. I don't know what I was trying to prove. I could feel the eyes of every guest on us, but the room had faded. It was just the two of us, mother and daughter, standing at the edge of years of misunderstanding. Do you remember, I said quietly, the first day you got your scholarship letter? You came running into the kitchen, waving it in the air. I told you that you'd earned it because you worked hard and treated people kindly. That second part mattered more than the first. She nodded, tears gathering on her lashes, and I forgot. I reached up and touched her cheek, the way I used to when she was small. No, darling, you just got lost for a while. We all do. Around us, the guests were silent now, their champagne bubbles gone flat in the wake of something real. Emily took a breath, her voice trembling but sure. I made you feel small in front of my friends. I was ashamed of where I came from of you, because I thought it made me look less, but tonight, I saw what real grace looks like, and it wasn't at this table. A murmur moved through the crowd. She turned, facing them all. You laugh at the people who make this world kinder, simpler, better. You forget that everything you admire, the confidence, the talent, the education, came from someone who gave without asking for applause. I wanted to stop her, but she shook her head gently. No, Mom, let me finish. She turned back to me. You taught me that success means nothing if it empties your heart. I'm sorry it took me this long to understand. I smiled through the ache in my chest. Then you've learned the most important lesson of all, I said. Never measure people by the shine of their shoes, only by the size of their heart. For a long moment, we simply held each other. The applause began again, hesitant at first, then full, not for the performance, but for the truth that had filled the room. Emily whispered, will you come home with me next week? Just for tea. No gowns, no champagne, just us. I'd like that, I said. As the crowd began to disperse, Evan caught my eye and gave a small nod, the quiet acknowledgement of one soul to another. I returned the gesture. Outside, the night air was cool against my skin. The lights from the house glowed behind us like a fading memory. Emily slipped her arm through mine as we walked toward the car, and for the first time in years, it felt like I was being invited home, not as Mrs. Margaret Cole, but simply as Mom. Respect, I learned, isn't demanded, it's remembered. By the time the last guests left, the house had grown still. The laughter that once filled it had quieted into polite goodbyes and the soft clink of glasses being cleared away. Outside, the garden lights flickered faintly against the mist, and the air smelled of rain-soaked roses. Emily walked beside me, no longer rushing ahead, no longer pretending I wasn't there. Her arm brushed mine as we stepped into the cool night. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was walking behind her. I was walking with her. At the car, she hesitated before opening the door. "Mom," she said quietly, her voice almost shy. "Thank you for coming tonight. I know it wasn't easy." I smiled. It was worth it. She looked down at her hands, twisting her ring the way she used to when she was nervous before exams. "I should have stood up for you sooner. I didn't know how you did tonight," I said. "That's what matters." She nodded, and in the reflection of the car window, I caught her wiping her eyes. "I'll come by next weekend," she promised. "We can cook together. Maybe make your lemon scones again." "That would be nice," I said softly. "It's been too long." For a moment, she leaned her head on my shoulder, the way she used to when she was little and too tired to climb the stairs. The warmth of her touch felt like forgiveness, quiet, unspoken, real. As she helped me into the car, she noticed the navy dress. "You looked beautiful tonight," she said. I laughed gently. "This old thing, it's older than you. Then it's aged gracefully," she said, smiling through the tears. When the door closed, I watched her walk back toward the house, shoulders no longer tense, steps unhurried. The lights behind her glowed softly, like a chapter ending with peace instead of regret. I looked down at my dress, remembering the day I first wore it, when I'd stood in a crowded auditorium, holding a certificate for years of teaching. Back then, it had symbolized hard work and quiet pride. Tonight, it meant something different. It wasn't about what I'd achieved. It was about what I'd kept: grace, patience, and love that never gave up. The navy fabric felt lighter now, as if it had let go of the weight it carried. As the car pulled away, I glanced out the window at my daughter's house fading in the distance. The night seemed softer, forgiving. I didn't need applause or admiration. I'd been given something far greater: my daughter's respect, freely offered, and finally understood. I once thought my story ended at that party, but in truth, that's where it began. Weeks later, I received an envelope in the mail. This one wasn't gilded or formal. It was handwritten in Emily's looping script. Inside was a small card: "Charity benefit for underprivileged schools, hosted by Emily Hastings." At the bottom, in smaller print, she'd written, "For the teachers who build worlds we rarely see." When I arrived, the room looked nothing like her old gatherings. The tables were simple, the decorations modest. On the stage stood a group of young teachers from struggling districts, their faces glowing with hope and exhaustion. And beside them, my daughter, smiling with pride that no longer needed to hide behind perfection. She spoke with a softness I hadn't heard in years. "My mother taught me that dignity doesn't come from wealth," she said. "It comes from giving others the courage to stand tall. Tonight, we honor those who do that every day." The applause that followed wasn't polite, it was full and heartfelt. I felt my throat tighten, not from sorrow this time, but from joy. Afterward, she found me near the back of the hall. "You inspired this," she said, taking my hand. "I used to think legacy meant status, but now I know it's the lives we lift quietly." I squeezed her hand. "Then you've built something lasting." She nodded, tears shimmering in her eyes. "You were right, Mom. The size of a heart, that's what matters most." Outside, the evening air was cool again, carrying the faint sound of laughter from inside the hall, laughter that no longer excluded anyone. I looked up at the sky, pale with the first hint of dawn. For years, I had measured my worth by how well I stayed out of the way, how little I demanded. But I understood now. Humility doesn't mean silence. It means standing tall without stepping on anyone else. As we drove home, Emily rested her head against the window, peaceful, content. I watched her reflection in the glass and saw not a woman trying to escape her past, but one finally embracing it. And for the first time, I felt my own life had rippled outward through her, through every student, through every act of kindness that began in one small classroom long ago. The lights faded behind us, but the warmth remained, because the truest legacies aren't written in invitations or titles. They live quietly in the hearts that remember you, long after the music stops.